Mr. John Cleese.
Hi.
A very warm welcome to Fredagsintervjun, the Friday interview.
A warm welcome in Stockholm, right? I'll take one of my pullovers off.
I'm so happy to have you here in our basement studio.
Well, I'm delighted to do it because I love radio. I think it's so much better medium than television for these kind of chats. Because in television, there's always time pressure, always somebody looking at their watch and thinking, I've got 4 more questions that I have to squeeze in the next 20 seconds, Yeah. And radio, it's much better. And I much rather, if I'm sometimes on tour and I ask, can I be interviewed by a radio host? Because they're much better than television hosts.
Okay, nice to hear. I love radio as well.
So lovely. It's more intimate. Yeah. That's what I like about it. And as I was saying to you just now, I'm looking straight at you now when I'm talking, so that the natural things that we do, there's a branch of psychology called gaze, G-A-Z-E, which is all about how we look at each other and how we respond to what's being said. And I got interested in that at one point. You don't have any of that in television because you're sort of splitting your attention between the audience and the interviewer, and there isn't the connection that you have with a radio interview.
And I introduced you as Mr. Cleese, not as Sir Cleese, which could have been the case if you'd accepted an offer of knighthood a few years ago.
No, I was never offered knighthood. No. I was offered a CBE, which is a commander of the British Empire, and I can still remember I asked them, am I allowed to call myself Commander Cleese, like Commander Bond in the Bond movie? No, they said. And I said, well, what's this empire? And they said, well, we've still got Falkland Islands. I said, pass. And then when Paddy Ashton, who was the head of the Liberal Democrats, the Middle Party, and I liked him and admired him hugely. So I helped the Lib Dems a bit with things like proportional representation, which we still don't have in England. And at the end, I was asked when he retired from politics whether I wanted to be in the House of Lords, and I was very tempted, as I said last night when you were in the audience, because it would have annoyed the Pythons so much. But I then discovered that it involved being in London in the winter, so I passed on that too. Yeah. So I have no honours of any kind, and several of the other people that I admire most in England, writers like Alan Bennett and Michael Frayn, have the same attitude towards them. We quite like it when our friends get them, but we don't want to get involved.
Right. So you remain a Mr. anyway.
I remain a Mr., yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're 85 years old now. You're turning 86 in October, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, nearly dead.
And you're in Sweden as part of a European tour. In the autumn, you'll be touring the States. Why are you working so hard?
Well, it's very simple. When I was 70, I had a very expensive divorce, and I built up a nice little nest egg, not the sort of size that Americans are able to do, because the BBC does not pay particularly well. The reason we all work for the BBC is they did the best programs. But in those days, in the 60s and 70s, you didn't expect to make much money by doing shows on British television. You really didn't. And it was only later that people started making a small fortune because they changed the rules so that somebody like Rowan Atkinson made the shows for his own company, and the BBC paid for the making of those shows in exchange for 2 showings. And then after that, Rowan and Griffin and Mel Smith and others owned those shows, and later were able to sell their companies for 20, 30 million.
So you need the money, is
Well, no. And if you think that I started with I think Monty Python first payment I ever had was £240 for an episode.
Right.
Not a fortune. And the other thing is I always give advice that if you're going to have a rather bad divorce, try to have it when you're 40, not when you're 70.
So what's your day-to-day routine like when you're on tour?
On tour? Oh, well, if I'm feeling like this, which is that my big toe is still giving me trouble on the left foot 5 years after a bone spur operation, and I've got vertigo, and I've got a chest infection, then it's mainly rather boring. It's being in the hotel room reading and then making sure I've got energy for the show in the evening. It's a great disappointment because I do love Stockholm. I think it's an extraordinary city, and it's rather disappointing to have to just sit in the warm and wait. But, you know, this is the thing about performing in the evening. You must make sure that you're in the best possible state when you go on stage. So a lot of that just means resting.
When I was preparing for the interview, and in my notes, I wrote that perhaps the only other octogenarian I could think of who works as hard as you is the Pope. Which I can't say now. How did you react to?
Well, I was very sad because I thought he was he was a very, very special man. I remember Pope John the 22nd, who I thought was similar. But of course, they're in this awful organization. By which I mean an organization, the Catholic Church, which seems to be built on the opposite end of the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I wrote a line once in a Monty Python book when somebody asked the vice pope that given Christ's teaching about poverty and tolerance, wasn't the Catholic Church rather sort of deficient in some of those things? And he said, look, if you are promoting a teaching of humility and poverty and tolerance, you need a very rich, powerful organization to do it, which is terribly funny and terribly true. You know?
It seems contradictory.
Well, it's a great shame, I think, that people who label themselves Christians more or less neglect his teaching. And I'm just reading something a couple of days ago about Puritans and how much the Puritans in North America really adopted Christianity that was from which Christ was more or less excluded. And if you think of these Christian nationalists that you now see, I mean, I think Christ would not have approved.
So I saw your show last night, and it's called The Last Time to See Me Before I Die. I believe you were here.
Which could be at any moment during this interview, the way I feel this morning.
Well, it would go viral then. But I believe you were here a decade ago, and you had with a show of the same title. So will you keep your word this time?
Was it?
Yeah.
I was usually, I'm with my Andy here, my great friend who makes everything possible for me. He's my nurse, basically. Was I?
I think it was in 2016.
Yes, that was the title.
And what was it titled?
Last Time to See Me Before I Die, but last night was an evening with the late John Cleese.
Oh, yes. So the last one was Last Chance to See Me Before I Die. And then this tonight really should be labeled The First Chance to See Me Since I Died.
Okay. Well, they got the titles mixed up then, I think, on the website, because I thought last night's show was called The Last Time to See Me.
Oh, well.
Anyhow.
You can't supervise everything, unfortunately.
Okay. Anyway, why do you joke so much about your own death?
Well, as you get older, you become more aware of it. And I've always been surprised at people's attitude to death because, first of all, it's embarrassing. People don't want to talk about it. There's that, which I think is quite wrong. It's a central point of life is when it finishes. And I'm also very interested in a lot of the research and evidence that's been coming in showing that something goes on after you die. And I don't know what, but I do know that there are some things for which what they call survival is the best explanation. You know, there are always alternative explanations, and then you have to apply Occam's razor and come up with the simplest one. And the simplest one is that some people, at any rate, do continue in some form after they die. And all the near-death experiences, if people think I'm talking nonsense, read about the near-death experiences and you come to the conclusion, and also the out-of-body experiences, which are almost more convincing, where people have observed their own operations from the ceiling and then can report afterwards exactly what happened and what people said, despite the fact they were completely unconscious at the time of their eyes shut.
But does it give you comfort to think of a possibility
it makes it more interesting, because I think when I lie on my deathbed and I will be thinking I won't be seeing these people again, or at least not for a time, but I think it will be interesting to be able to think, I wonder what happened next, instead of thinking, well, this is the end, you know.
But speaking of death and aging, I read an interview with you where you talked about going to a Swiss clinic, paying £17,000 every 12 to 18 months for the past, was it a decade or even 2 decades?
I've been going to stem cell treatments places for a long time now, and I'm actually going straight back to La Prairie in Montreux at the end of this tour. I finish in Germany and I go there a few days later. And I think the stem cell treatment is the reason that I look a lot younger at 85
because it's supposed to
than
slow
a lot
down
of people.
The aging process.
Well, it's nothing to do with living a virtuous life. So the only thing that I do that's different from people of my age who look older is I have stem cells, and the idea behind them, which is these stems at very, very low levels of development, which they can turn into any cell you want. They can go around the body and look for parts of the body which need repair, and they can then turn into the cells that are necessary for the repair. So I think it must work, and it's very interesting to look at the pictures on the walls there, which are of Englishmen from like Churchill, who lived to considerable ages at the time when lots of people didn't.
Did he go through the same treatment? Or?
Well, there are pictures up there. Yes, and a number of other people like Somerset Maugham, the modelists, who were living into their late 80s when people were, dying in their late 60s.
I think Kim Kardashian has tried it as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But she's not dead yet, unfortunately. No.
Unfortunately. Well, I believe that the clinical research into stem cells' impact on aging is in quite early stages.
Oh, yes.
Are you a guinea pig for this treatment, or are you quite convinced that it works?
Well, I don't think so. They've been doing it certainly since the 1940s. So they've been doing it, I think, for nearly 90 years.
Right.
So I think guinea pig isn't. I think a lot of it's proven, but they're very cautious people. I love the doctors there. One of them, a Swiss doctor, said, "We're just cautious Swiss farmers, Mr. Cleese. We're very cautious about making claims." And he told me something about the cure rate for prostate cancer. But he said, we mustn't talk about this because the sample is a very small number of people. I think it was about 12, and 10 of them, it had stopped. The cancer had stopped after the treatment. But they wouldn't make the claim because they're very respectable scientifically. But I like telling people about it because I think it's a pretty good way to spend $17,000. I mean, a lot of people would spend that on a car. I don't have a car.
But £17,000 per year for 10, 20 years, that's a lot of money. So is it worth it?
Yeah, but it's not a lot of money for another few years of life.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be more important than a few years of life? What, a bigger car? Another house? Another holiday home? A diamond? You know, in terms of other things that you could buy for that, I think that's about the best value there is. Somebody once said that the most important thing in life is there an afterlife? because it changes everything. And if you think there is an afterlife, then I think life becomes much more interesting. At the same time, it's not that I'm frightened to die, but I want to get as much life before I die as possible. And I find that this is a very interesting time to be alive.
Hej, Staffan Dopping här, poddredaktör på Kvartal. Tack för att du tittade. Om du gillade det här klippet så klicka på gilla-knappen och skriv gärna en kommentar. Vi är nyfikna på vad du tycker. Och prenumerera också på vår kanal så missar du inte när det kommer fler klipp. Visste du att Kvartal inte bara finns på YouTube? Vi publicerar också fördjupande poddar och texter om vår tids mest brännande frågor. Lyssna och läs på kvartal.se. Men glöm aldrig, tänk själv.